He said I brought nothing into the marriage, not knowing everything was in my name, not knowing that the house we were standing in, the one he was throwing a trash bag of my clothes across the floor of, had only one name on the deed, mine. Not knowing that the two cars in the driveway, both of them, were registered to one person, me. Not knowing that the business he had spent 4 years calling his, the one he bragged about at dinner parties, the one he described to new acquaintances with his chest out and his voice full, was built on a license, a lease, and a founding document that all carried the same signature, mine. If you are listening to this right now, I need you to stay with me, because what I'm about to tell you is not simply a story about a marriage that ended. It is a story about what happens when a person spends years being told they are nothing and quietly, carefully, legally, paper by paper, proves otherwise. And before I go any further, tell me in the comments where you are listening from right now. Are you in a house that doesn't feel like yours anymore? Are you in a car driving somewhere to clear your head? Are you lying in the dark, earphones in, listening to someone else's story because it's easier than sitting with your own? I read every comment, every single one. Because stories like this don't belong to just one woman. They belong to every person who has ever been told they are a burden by someone whose entire life is quietly resting on their shoulders. Let me take you back to the beginning, not the morning he threw that trash bag, not the moment I pulled out those documents, but to the very start, to the woman I was before I ever met him, and to everything that woman had already built before he walked in and decided she was lucky to have him. My name is Claudette Ferris Hammond, and before I was anyone's wife, I was my father's daughter. And my father, Joseph Ferris, was the kind of man who made you understand money the way some families teach religion, with reverence, with discipline, and with the absolute conviction that understanding it was not optional. My father grew up with very little. His parents were sharecroppers in a system designed to ensure that the people doing the work never accumulated anything from it. He watched his own father work land that would never belong to him, sign agreements that kept him permanently indebted, and die without a deed to his name or a dollar saved. My father carried that knowledge the way some people carry a scar, not with bitterness, but with a clarity so sharp it shaped everything he did. He went to school, he worked, he studied accounting at night while working at a machine shop during the day. He read every document before he signed it. He bought property as soon as he could afford a down payment, and then he bought more. He told me from the time I was old enough to understand words, Claudette, you can love people with your whole heart, but you put your name on paper always. Your word lives in the air, your name on paper lives forever. I grew up watching my father build something real, brick by careful brick. He owned 3 properties by the time I was a teenager. He built a small tax and financial services office that served our community for 22 years. He never drove a flashy car or wore expensive clothes or made noise about what he had. He just had it, and it was real, and it was documented, and it was his. He taught me the same way. I had my first savings account at 7th. He took me to the bank himself, walked me to the teller, and made me handle every part of the transaction. He explained interest to me at 9 using quarters on the kitchen table. By the time I was 16, I understood the difference between an asset and a liability. By the time I was in college studying business administration, I already had a small investment account that I had started myself and managed myself, reading books my father recommended and calling him every Sunday to talk through what I was learning. When I was 26, my father was diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's disease. He was 61. He was still sharp, still present, still completely himself, but the diagnosis shifted something in both of us. We started meeting more formally, not just as father and daughter, but as the two people responsible for the careful structure he had built. He began transferring assets to me properly, legally, with attorneys present and documents filed. Not because he was dying, because he was a man who understood preparation is not pessimism. He used to say, "I'm not preparing for the worst, I'm protecting the best." By the time I was 28, I had been named on 3 properties. I had a portfolio that was modest but real and growing. I had my father's business running properly with a manager in place, and I was working in corporate finance during the day and learning real estate investment on weekends. I was not wealthy in a way that announced itself. I was wealthy in the way my father had taught me, quietly, structurally, on paper, in the places that mattered. And that was when I met Marcus. Marcus Hammond was 32 when we met at a mutual friend's birthday dinner. He was tall, well-dressed, funny in the particular way that fills a room without effort, and he had the kind of attention, at the beginning, that makes a person feel like they are the most interesting thing that has ever happened to someone. He asked me questions and actually listened to the answers. He remembered what I said and brought it back later in conversation. He was warm with strangers and generous with compliments and had a laugh that made you want to be the one who caused it. He was also, though I would not understand the full shape of this for years, a man who needed to be the most important thing in every room he entered. Not obviously, not in a way you could point to immediately. It revealed itself slowly, the way damp reveals itself in a wall. You don't see the damage until it's already gone deep. We dated for 2 years. He was attentive and fun, and the relationship had a momentum that felt natural, that felt like something that was supposed to happen. He met my father, and they got along well, or at least Marcus performed getting along well, which at the time I could not distinguish from the real thing. My father, who had spent his whole life reading documents and the people behind them, said to me one evening after one of these dinners, "He's charming, Claudette." Just that. I should have heard what he was not saying. I was too in love to listen for the silence. We got engaged. We started planning a wedding. And it was during the wedding planning, the first real, sustained logistical project we undertook together, that I got my first clear window into Marcus without the performance. He did not want to be involved in the planning unless it was the parts that he would be visible in, the venue, the guest list optics, what the photographs would look like. The actual machinery of it, the contracts, the vendors, the budgeting, the documentation, he waved away as details. "You're better at that stuff," he would say. "That's your thing." It seemed almost like a compliment at the time. I was better at it, so I handled it. I didn't realize until much later that "you're better at that" would become his all-purpose justification for never being accountable for anything practical, ever. We married when I was 30. It was a beautiful wedding. I organized all of it. He looked wonderful in the photographs. Now, I need to tell you something important, because this is the part where my father's voice in my head becomes the hinge point of this entire story. About 6 months before the wedding, my father sat me down. He was in a gentle decline by then, the Parkinson's progressing slowly but visibly, and he had become more direct than usual, the way people sometimes do when they feel time becoming more specific. He said, "Claudette, I love Marcus. I hope he makes you happy, but I want to talk to you about the assets before you get married." In most states, assets that you bring into a marriage, that you owned before the wedding, can remain separate property if they are properly documented and, critically, if they are not commingled with marital finances. My father knew this because my father knew everything about money and property law that could be known by a non-attorney who had spent 40 years paying very close attention. He had his own attorney, a woman named Patricia, who had handled his affairs for 15 years, explain all of it to me in detail. He said, "You can love your husband and still protect what is yours. Those two things are not in conflict. A man who loves you will understand that. I talked to Marcus about it. It was the first real fight we ever had. He called it insulting. He said it suggested I was already planning to leave. He said his mother would be horrified if she knew I was approaching our marriage as a business transaction. He was hurt. He was wounded. He was, I now understand, performing being wounded because it was the most effective way for me to back down. I almost backed down, but I did not, because of my father's voice and because of Patricia sitting across from me with documents in her hands, and because some part of me that I had not listened to enough recognized that a man who truly trusted in the marriage he was entering would not be threatened by documentation. So I kept the properties separate. I kept the assets in my name. We combined some finances, a joint account for household expenses, shared budgeting for our daily life together. But the foundational things, the things my father had built and transferred to me, the investments and the properties and the business interests, those stayed exactly where they were, in my name, on paper, the way my father taught me. And Marcus said fine. He said it was fine. He signed what needed to be signed. He moved into the house, my house, the one I had purchased before we met, and he said it was fine. For a while, it almost was.
The first 4 years were not bad years. I want to say that honestly, because I think when a marriage ends in the way mine did, there's a pressure to rewrite the entire history as a warning sign, to say you always knew, to say it was obvious from the beginning. That's not true, and I won't say it. There were good years. There was genuine warmth and real laughter and moments of real partnership. We traveled. We built routines together. We talked about children and what our family would look like in the future, in the easy, open way of people who believe they have time. But underneath the good years, something was constructing itself quietly. The way Marcus talked about things started to shift. The house became our house in his language, and I understood that. I didn't police his language. Of course, he thought of it as home. But then it became the house we'd built together. Then it became what I've built. Then, at a dinner party when I was in the kitchen and didn't hear him say it, our friend Diane told me later that when someone had admired the house, Marcus had said he'd always had an eye for property and explained in some detail how he'd put the deal together. He had not been involved in that purchase in any way. His business, the marketing consulting practice he started in year 2 of our marriage, was another chapter. I supported it entirely, not emotionally, though I did that too. I mean, I funded it. The startup capital came from my accounts. The business lease was signed in my name because his credit at the time had issues I won't detail publicly, but which I was aware of and chose to help him navigate. The founding documents listed me as a primary stakeholder. He was the operator, I was the foundation. That was the agreement, explicit, documented, signed. He built the business into something real. I give him full credit for that. He was good at the work, good with clients, genuinely talented at the creative side of what they did. Within 3 years, it was profitable and growing, and he had a team of 7 people and a reputation in the local market that was legitimate and earned. I was proud of him. I told him so. But as the business grew, my name on those documents started to bother him. He brought it up first, casually. We should probably restructure things now that we're more established. And I listened and asked what he had in mind, and his answer was that my name should come off the founding documents, that he should be the sole owner of record, that the current structure was complicated. I asked why it was complicated. He said it just was. I asked complicated for whom. He did not answer. I said I'd think about it. I did not make any changes. And this, though I did not know it at the time, was the moment the temperature in our marriage began to drop, slowly at first, then faster, then in the last year steadily, irreversibly, like a house losing heat through every window at once. He started to be cruel in the specific surgical way that people are cruel when they want to cause damage without leaving marks. Not shouting, not at first. Quiet contempt, the kind delivered in a tone of voice that sounds almost reasonable, almost patient, so that when you try to describe it to someone else later, it comes out flat and you sound oversensitive. He would say things like, "You don't really understand how business works at the operational level." This to a woman with a business administration degree and a decade of financial management experience. He would say, "I built everything we have. In the house I owned, with capital I provided." He would say, in discussions about our future, "You've always been taken care of," as though my financial security was something that had been given to me rather than built by my father and by me carefully over decades. The word burden appeared for the first time in year 5. It was during an argument about money. He wanted to expand the business in a way I thought was premature, and I said so, and he said, "You've always been a weight on the things you claim to support." I remember standing in the kitchen after he said it with the specific stillness of someone who has just heard something that cannot be unheard. By year 6, I had been to see a therapist, consulted with Patricia, who had taken over my father's affairs and mine after my father's health declined further, and quietly, carefully begun to prepare, not because I had decided the marriage was over, but because my father's voice never fully left my head, and it was saying very clearly, "Pay attention to what is being built here, Claudette. Look at the structure. Look at where the weight is actually sitting." My father passed away in the spring of year 6. He was in his sleep, peaceful, which was the only mercy of it. I was with him. I held his hand. He had spent the last few months making sure every single document was in order. My father, even at the end, was protecting the best. He left me everything, a formal, legal, fully documented everything. And Marcus, at my father's funeral, shook hands and accepted condolences and told people what a great man Joseph Ferris had been, and then he came home and told me he wanted a divorce. Act 4, The Trash Bag, 27:30 to 33:30. He waited 3 weeks after the funeral. I don't know if that was a deliberate calculation or just the time it took him to arrange his thoughts into the shape he wanted them in. But 3 weeks after I buried my father, Marcus sat me down and said he was unhappy. He said the marriage had run its course. He said he had spoken to an attorney. I said I understood and that I would speak to Patricia and that we should approach this properly and respectfully.
That was not the response he was expecting. I think he expected crying. I think he expected bargaining. I think he had prepared himself for a particular performance, and I had declined to be the scene partner he needed. And that refusal, that simple, quiet composure, did something to him. It cracked whatever restraint he had been maintaining. Over the following 2 weeks, the mask came fully off. He became contemptuous in a way he no longer bothered to disguise. He invited his brother over and spoke about me in the third person while I was in the room. He told a neighbor, who told me within 24 hours, that he had carried Claudette for years and was finally free of the dead weight. He moved into the guest room. He started making calls in the kitchen that he didn't lower his voice for, talking about assets and entitlements and what he deserved from the marriage. And then on a Thursday morning in March, bright day, cold air, the kind of morning that feels falsely cheerful, he came into the bedroom where I was getting dressed for a meeting. He was holding a large black trash bag. He threw it at my feet. It landed with a heavy slap against the floor. He said, "Pack what you need. I want you out today." I looked at the bag. I looked at him. He said, and I will remember this forever, every word, every inflection, "You brought nothing into this marriage. You have contributed nothing. You are a penniless burden, and I am done. Get out of my house." My house. My house. I breathed in, I breathed out, and I thought of my father at a kitchen table with quarters lined up in a row, explaining interest to a 9-year-old girl who was going to need to understand this.
I thought of Patricia with documents in her hands and reading glasses on her nose and a voice like a closed door when she said, "Claudette, this is protected. This will always be protected." I thought of my father's handwriting on the back of a birthday card the year I turned 30 before the wedding that said only, "Know what you hold, my love. Know what is yours." I walked to my desk, I opened the bottom drawer, and I took out the folder. I turned around and I placed the folder on the bed between us. I said, "Before you tell me to get out again, I want to ask you a question." My voice was steady. I had not planned this voice. It just arrived from somewhere below the grief and the anger and the exhaustion of 6 years. If you brought nothing into this marriage, why is my name the only one on the deed to this house? He opened his mouth. "And both cars," I said, "registered in my name. You can check the glove compartments if you'd like." He closed his mouth. I opened the folder. I placed the deed to the house on the bed. I placed the vehicle registrations beside it. I placed the founding documents of his business, the one with his name on the sign, the one he had described to 3 different dinner parties as the thing he had built from nothing, and I put my finger on the line where a primary stakeholder was listed. My name. His face did something I had never seen it do before. It went completely white. Not red, I had expected red. White. The specific white of a person who has just looked down and realized they are standing on air. I said, "Every asset of significance that exists in this marriage is documented in my name, Marcus. The house you are standing in and telling me to leave, the cars you drive, the business you built. And yes, you built it. I have never disputed that. But that you built on capital I provided, on a lease I signed, with a license that carries my name. None of that is hidden. It has been in this folder since before we were married. Patricia has copies. The county records have copies. The state business registry has copies. It has always been there." He said, "You can't, that's not, the business is mine. I built that." "You did," I said, "and when we decide how to proceed with this divorce, I am prepared to have a reasonable conversation about the equity you have created there. I am not interested in destroying what you built. I am interested in accuracy. And the accurate statement is not that I brought nothing into this marriage." I looked at him. I held his eyes. "The accurate statement is that without what I brought into this marriage, you would be starting from nothing today." He sat down on the edge of the bed. He literally sat down, the way people do when their legs make the decision before their mind does. I picked up the documents. I put them back in the folder. And I said clearly, without anger, without performance, because I had nothing to perform for and no one to impress, "I am not leaving. This is my house. You are welcome to leave, or you are welcome to behave like an adult and have this handled properly through our attorneys. Those are the options. There is no version of today where I walk out with a trash bag." I looked at the bag still on the floor. "You can put that away." Then I picked up my purse and my phone and I went to my meeting. The divorce took 9 months. Patricia was extraordinary. Marcus's attorney, to his credit, was not incompetent. He recognized quickly what the documentation showed, and he counseled Marcus accordingly, which is to say he counseled him to be reasonable because the alternative was a discovery process that would only confirm in increasing detail what the documents already said. We reached a settlement. I will not share every detail because some of it involves ongoing arrangements, but I will tell you what I think is important. Marcus received a fair equity stake in the business he had built and operated. I was not punitive about that. He had genuinely created value there, and I had never intended to take that from him. What I would not concede was the house. What I would not concede was the narrative, the penniless burden story, the I built everything story, because that story was not true, and the documents were not going to pretend it was true, and I was not going to pretend it was true either. He moved out in July. I repainted the bedroom in August. I had Sunday dinner with my mother and my best friend Loretta in September at my dining room table, and I made my father's recipe for oxtail stew, and we talked and laughed, and the house felt like mine again. Not mine again, actually. Mine still. Mine the whole time. I want to talk to you about my father for a moment, because this is where the story really lives. He never told me to protect myself because he didn't trust the people I would love. He told me to protect myself because he understood something profound, that love and documentation are not opposites, that caring for someone and being structurally protected are not in conflict, that the right person, the person who actually loves you, will not be threatened by your name being on paper, because your name being on paper doesn't say, I don't trust you. It says, I know who I am. It says, I know what I built. It says, I came into this as a whole person with a real history, and I am not prepared to pretend otherwise. Marcus called what I did insulting. He said it suggested I didn't trust him. But here is what I have come to understand. His discomfort had nothing to do with trust and everything to do with power. Because a woman who knows exactly what she owns and has it documented is a woman who cannot be told she has nothing. And a man who needs you to believe you have nothing, who needs that as the operating premise of the relationship, is a man who is afraid of what you actually are. If you are listening to this right now and you are in a relationship where someone keeps telling you you bring nothing, you contribute nothing, you should be grateful for what you have been given, I want you to hear this as directly as I know how to say it. Take inventory, not just of your emotions, not just of your history. Take actual, concrete inventory of what you have built, what you hold, what exists in the world because of your effort and your care and your quiet, steady showing up. And then look at who is telling you it doesn't exist and ask yourself what they need you not to know. My father spent his whole life putting his name on paper, not because he was suspicious of people, because he respected what he had built enough to protect it. He taught me to do the same, and on a Thursday morning in March, when a man threw a trash bag at my feet and told me I had nothing, I was able to reach into a drawer and show him, calmly, clearly, without a single raised voice, exactly what I had. Know what you hold. Put your name on paper, and never, not for love, not for peace, not for the comfort of someone who is made uneasy by the size of what you carry, pretend that what you built does not exist. Thank you for listening to every single word of this. If this story reached you somewhere real, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And leave me a comment. Tell me where you're listening from. Tell me what you know that you hold. I'll be reading. I always am.